back to Hebrews 10, leaving it at verse 14 so that we could talk a little bit about salvation. The definition of saved being to rescue from danger. The second one includes the word preserve. Those two ideas, rescuing and preservation, are the ones that basically apply to the whole way the word is used in English and in Greek. And we talked about how the evangelical approach to salvation developed into what we now think of as something that happens instantly and includes a lot of different things. And so the whole conversation today is going to be around the term in the New Testament and how the words are used in the New Testament and how that baggage is not attached to it in the New Testament. I already talked about these words last week. The primary word, Sōzō, which means save the way we think of save, and sotηρία, which is the result of being saved, salvation, and σωτήρ is one who saves someone else. That pretty much encapsulates the use of the word in the New Testament. And then the opposite of that we see a few times, this is not used as much as it gets used by us to talk about people who haven't been delivered, have not been converted. We call them the lost. That doesn't really get used in the New Testament in that context, but there are a couple of places where Sōzō is contrasted to Apollymi, and we'll look at a couple of those. Sōtēria is where we get the term soteriology from when we talk about the doctrine of salvation. So first, let's look at it in Hebrews, since that's where we're focusing. In Hebrews, chapter 11, which we're going to be approaching very quickly here, we see it used this way. By faith, Noah constructed an ark for the saving of his household. And so this is what I'm going to repeat over and over again. This is the word that we're talking about, Sōzō. But you can see in the context that this is not talking about Noah's family being saved the way we use the word saved. It means that Noah constructed an ark so his family wouldn't drown. And that is the way the word is meant to be used. That's exactly what it means, is he preserved his household by keeping them from drowning. He rescued them. That we look at this a little bit differently. So that's why both of those words I think need to be in your head when you see this word. Because he preserved his household. Had they actually been in the water, he would have rescued his household. So that's kind of the way we approach this word. But it has both context in English and in Greek, and so you have to kind of figure out from the context which way to look at it. But again, it's not about that they were converted in some way. This was not conversion, this is saving them. In chapter 2, he talks about the message declared by angels was proved to be reliable, and every transgression or disobedience received a just penalty in the law. That being the case, how shall we escape if we neglect such a great salvation? This is a good example of how the way we think about salvation gets projected onto this verse, because this makes complete sense to us if we read it in the context of how shall we escape if we neglect such a great salvation experience, if we don't get saved in our terminology. But he doesn't really mean it that way. He's simply saying, verse 2 is talking about how the law, which was delivered by angels, was reliable and justice was served through the law. So how shall we escape if we neglect the salvation, the deliverance, the preservation brought by Jesus, which does the same thing the law did? So thus, this is a preservation based on how Jesus delivered the escape that we have through Jesus. It's not talking about a conversion. It's just simply the result of listening to Jesus. And you see that further a few verses later. For it was fitting that he, for whom and by whom all things exist, God, in bringing many sons to glory, should make the founder, Jesus, of their salvation perfect through suffering. Jesus brought preservation, rescue, through his suffering. And being made perfect, he became the source of eternal rescue to all who obey him, eternal preservation. So this is not talking about the experience, it's talking about the result. This is his rescue or his preservation being eternal, the source of it, him being the source of it. These verses are a little more pointed. Chapter 1. Are they not all angels, ministering spirits, sent out to serve for the sake of those who are to inherit in the future salvation? So again, this preservation will occur in the future. In the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death, and he was heard because of his reverence. Now this one is a particularly good reference to what we're talking about here. So it's obviously talking about the Garden of Gethsemane experience. We talked about this when we went through chapter 5. Jesus offered up prayers and supplication with loud cries and tears. Two ways to look at this, from Jesus being the Son of God or Jesus being a man. Offering up loud cries and tears, saying, if it be your will, don't let this happen to me. So from the human perspective, to us, that is, don't let me be arrested and be tortured and suffer through the 6 hours of death on the cross and be dead. That's the human. If that was us, that's what we would be saying when we say, don't let this happen to me. Let this cup pass from me. Then there's the spiritual application where we look at it from the perspective that Jesus is saying, don't let me take on the sins of the world. An honest assessment of what's going on in the Garden of Gethsemane would be the human aspect. And it bears out from what he says here, because he's praying and offering up these prayers to him who was able to save him from death. Who was able to save him from death? God the Father. This implies that he couldn't save himself from death, that only God the Father could step in and make that happen. But what does it mean? What is he saying when he says that God was able to save him from death? Well, let's do the substitution here. You could preserve him from death or do what really happened, because the end of the verse says, and he was heard because of his reverence. So God heard his prayer and did what and gave Jesus what he was asking for. But we know that Jesus didn't avoid arrest or torture or death on a cross. So that's not what he was preserved from. So what did God do? He rescued him from death. So that's the different perspective. It didn't keep it from happening, but he rescued him from something. It's the same application as if somebody's in the middle of a lake and they're drowning, and you swim out there and pull them in. You rescued them from the water. You rescued them from drowning. In this case, God rescued him from death. He did die, and he rescued him from it. He removed him from death by resurrection. So that's what he's saying here. Now, the most obvious point to see is that he was praying for God the Father to preserve or rescue him, to save him. If we take the way we use the word and put it in here, it really has, you can see the contrast that I'm trying to draw. Jesus didn't need to have a conversion experience. And so when I get through with this whole thing, that's my main point that I want you to see. Anytime you read this word in the New Testament, you need to stop and look at the context, because we put baggage on this word that doesn't belong on it. There's no place, when I get through, you'll see this, there's no place at all in the New Testament where you see the word save, and it means what we put on it. They didn't use it that way. We started using it that way. All right, let's keep going. Consequently, Jesus now, is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God. So we know we're talking about Jesus, not God, through him, himself, since he always lives to make intercession for them. Now, again, this sounds like exactly what we call saved. But the point the Hebrews writer is making is that Jesus is able to rescue those who draw near to God through him. He rescues them from what we would call being lost, but ultimately, because it's been the thing he's talked about all the way through the book, he rescues them from missing the promise, because the goal is to get the promise, to make the promise. So that's what he means here. One more. So Christ, having been offered once, and we just saw this one in chapter 9, to bear the sins of many, will appear a second time, not to deal with sin, but to then, at that time, save those who are eagerly waiting for him. So we've seen in all of this, saved in the past, getting saved, being saved in the present, and now here we have being saved in the future, which in the context we use the way we use the word doesn't work, because we think of it as something that happens at a point. So that could have been in the past, or if you just happen to be standing there when it happens, it could be happening in the present, but it definitely is not a future thing. If you're saved, it's not future, it's past, and that's the way we use it. So again, that's why using this word creates a problem in our brain in the New Testament. Because for us, the New Hampshire Confession of Faith is what saved means. Most importantly, to challenge the context that we use it in, it's something that is in an instant, in a moment. You can define it at a point. And that's not the way it gets used in the New Testament. Let's look at a couple of examples of how it was actually used in the New Testament and by the church fathers immediately thereafter. This is a chart that basically goes through the usages. So a decisive transition into a new relationship with God. That's what we call salvation. And it's strongly supported in both the canonical writings and the church father patristic writings. So it does work in that context, but then all the other stuff we kind of put on it messes it up. Every Christian possesses the Holy Spirit. Well, that's strongly supported in both the church fathers and in the New Testament. The transition normally occurs at an identifiable instant. So you can say when you were saved. Well, that's not supported. It is supported kind of in a way, and we'll look at some of those in a minute, but it's definitely not supported by the church fathers. That's not the way they use the term. Receiving the Spirit and being filled with the Spirit are the same thing. Well, that's not the case either. There are two different approaches to receiving the Spirit. You can receive it by just being indwelt, and then you can receive it in an experiential way at a special moment for a special purpose in the New Testament. Saved always means conversion. Well, not in the New Testament it doesn't, because you can be saved like we just saw with Jesus getting saved, and it wasn't a conversion experience. Initial salvation guarantees final salvation. Once saved, always saved. That is not supported very well in the New Testament, and the church fathers definitely didn't think that. And that's where we're going next in Hebrews. Now that's not to say this is not the case. It's just not the case in using the term salvation. All right, we'll talk about that. Pentecost supplies the universal conversion sequence. So Pentecost is not a good representation of what we call salvation either. And then faith alone marks the transition independent of baptism and incorporation into the church. Again, there are problems with that approach, especially in the book of Acts, because we see examples in the book of Acts where people get a little saved and then get a little more saved. That becomes a problem with the book of Acts especially. So let's look at just a couple of other places where we see this take place. One of the good examples of this is Zacchaeus, because Jesus uses this term for Zacchaeus. So he, Zacchaeus, ran ahead, climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry up and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So Zacchaeus hurried and came and received him joyfully. Now, just stop a second there and read what it says. He hurried and came down and received him joyfully. How would we take that? Because we use that term too. Somebody received Christ today. And so there's what Zacchaeus is doing. He's receiving Jesus. But what does it mean when it says that he came down and received him joyfully? Well, it's very clear in the language. What did Jesus say he had to do? So what did Zacchaeus do? He took him to his house and he received him, because that's what you do with a visitor. You see that here. And when they, the crowd, and particularly the Pharisees and the scribes, when they saw it, they all grumbled, he has gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. By the time you get to here, he's in the house already with Zacchaeus. So that's what received means. Beyond that, and Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. So here's the evidence of Zacchaeus' salvation. And Jesus said to him, Today salvation has come to this house, since he is also a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the Apollymi, the lost. So here we have the two words used together. This is one of the places that you see this. Jesus says the Son of Man came to seek, to save the lost. Now, a few things I want to point out though here. So once Zacchaeus received Jesus into his house, and we'll say that he had the experience that we're talking about here, he says, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I've defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. Well, what is he saying?
Give them back restitution.
Because of his experience. But that's not what it says. What does it say? It says, I give and I restore. So you can take that either way. You can take it that he says, I'm going to go fix all the bad stuff that I did. It also could mean that I didn't do bad stuff. You see that? I give half of my goods to the poor, and that I have always, if I figured out that I've taken something I shouldn't have taken, I've always restored it to them fourfold.
So he was a tax collector.
Well, that's the context, and that's the point. Because on the previous one, the Pharisees and scribes said he's gone into the house of sin, meaning that he committed sin.
He took from other people.
Or that they didn't like what he did.
They didn't like it.
So you can't just assume that Zacchaeus was a typical tax collector, because this could be telling us that he wasn't a typical tax collector. But we want him to be a sinful tax collector because it makes the story better. But it doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily the truth of the matter. And then so Jesus says, and this is where you're going to see the fine point that I'm trying to get to with this. Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, since he is also a son of Abraham." Now, if you really want to be literal about this, it's saying that the only reason that I'm pulling Zacchaeus out and saving him is because he's a son of Abraham. So nobody else is eligible. Is that what it means? Well, from everything else we know, that shouldn't be the case. So the explanation is in the next verse. For the Son of Man came to seek and save the Apollymi, the lost. That word means to be destroyed. But in that context, and we saw, this was on the chart I showed you with the words, it means something that has been cast out. In other words, probably the best analogy is garbage. Garbage is destroyed, and we separate ourselves from garbage because garbage is not something we want. And so this is what Zacchaeus was. Zacchaeus was lost. He was, in the eyes of the scribes and Pharisees in particular, garbage. Even though he was a son of Abraham. Zacchaeus was the perfect example of someone who, right or wrong, only because of his occupation, the scribes and Pharisees had separated from the tribe of Israel. He was cast out. The way we would look at this from the discussions we've had before was they'd thrown him out of the camp. And Jesus has come to put people like that back into the camp. It's not a spiritual thing in that sense, but simply to say Zacchaeus was unjustly, and even if he was a tax collector, this is what Jesus is saying. Even if he was a bad tax collector, this is what Jesus is saying. I've come to take those kinds of people and put them back where they're supposed to be. And that's what Jesus means when he saves. That's how the term is being used. He's rescuing them from destruction. In this case, specifically what he's saying is he's rescued Zacchaeus from being put outside of the place he was supposed to be. He was cast out of where he was supposed to be by the people who were supposed to be helping him, and Jesus is putting them back. This is the context of the word here, and you don't gather all that together if you read salvation and save and think you know what it says, because you just take it and you move on, because we've been told what salvation means. So Jesus gave Zacchaeus and his whole household a salvation experience. That's the way we approach it. But you miss all of that other stuff, which really has a lot more body to it if you understand it. So one more quick example, because we've talked about it before, and that's the Philippian jailer. You can see the same idea here. He brought them out and said, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" And they said, "All you have to do is believe in the Lord Jesus and you will be saved, and your household," again. And they spoke the word of the Lord to him and all of his house, and took them the same night and washed their wounds and baptized all, and he and his family. And he brought them together up to his house and set food before them, and he rejoiced along with his entire household that he had believed in God. The one thing that I want to point out here that we didn't talk about the last time is this last sentence feeds into our use of the word, and it really shouldn't. He rejoiced along with the entire household that he had believed in God. So that's another thing that's another way that we kind of make the application. When you get saved, you believe in God or you believe in Christ. When that's not there, what it literally says is that he had believed the God, which makes it just a little bit different. You see what I'm saying? So the fact that, it doesn't change what happened, but it changes the way we make application of the language. It's not like he didn't believe in gods or in God before, but now he believed the God. Here are the New Testament examples of immediate conversion, the way we've always understood it the last few hundred years, where there's an instantaneous salvation moment. So Zacchaeus, Philippian jailer, Cornelius in Acts, Pentecost, the day of Pentecost, Paul's Damascus Road experience, the sinful woman, which is not named as Mary Magdalene, but always gets called Mary Magdalene, where she cried and washed his feet with the ointment, the thief on the cross, and the Ethiopian eunuch. Now, these all have one big thing in common that you should be able to see on this slide. What is it? And I'll give you a big hint. Look at the end. Where do all of these examples come from? They come from one person. We don't get this from Paul. We don't get it in Peter or Jude or John, anything that has John's name on it. Luke's the only one that uses it this way. And he's not using the word save necessarily. He's just talking about an example of someone who's lost and someone who's immediately not lost in these contexts. And the thief didn't get baptized, which makes it different from most every other conversion we see in the New Testament. So there are intricacies in Luke that we don't see anywhere else. I'm not saying that means anything, but it is interesting. So I'll pick it up from here next week. There's just a little bit more to do through here, and we'll be back into Hebrews.